So it's change management process. We discussed about transition planning and support in the previous session, and today we are going to discuss about the change management. All the changes you are going to make in the IT service environment should be in a controlled manner, and you have to make sure that only beneficial changes to the business are done, and that too these changes should be done with minimum disruption to IT services. So when you are making the change, the disruption to the existing IT service should be as minimum as possible, and changes can be proactive or reactive. In order to correct or prevent something, you may do some proactive changes. In order to do a defect repair, you may repair the defect, you may do some reactive changes. However, the changes should be controlled. The changes should be evaluated before implementing them. It should be evaluated in various perspectives, and you have to control to minimize exposure to risk, severity, and disruption. And you have to balance between the need for change and impact of the change. So you have to do a trade-off. If you make the change, what would be the impact, and what is the need, what is the benefit you are going to get out of the change? Remember, the benefit should always outweigh the impact. The benefit should be more than the impact of the change, if the change is going to have some negative impacts or side effects. So you have to make sure that you control the life cycle of all the changes. That is, raising the change request until you close the change. You have to control the life cycle of the changes, and you have to make sure that only beneficial changes, beneficial to what? Beneficial to business. Beneficial changes to be made with minimum disruption to IT services. And you have to respond to changing business requirements. Your changes should be aligned with the changes that are required by the business, and thereby you will maximize the value, and you will try to reduce the incidents, interruptions, or rework. That is the objective of the change. So when you make the change, you have to make sure that the value is produced and the number of incidents because of the change are reduced, and the disruption and rework is reduced. And your changes, as I told you, it should be aligned with the business changes. It should be aligned with the business requirements. You are making changes in IT in order to support the business change, and all the changes should be recorded. No unauthorized changes should be made. Every change should be recorded, and it should be evaluated in various perspectives before approving it. And you have to make sure that only you are doing authorized changes. Unauthorized changes should not be done. So, as I told you, as a service provider, you have to align your changes with the business on the left side, if you see in the diagram, and with the supplier also. You must be wondering how supplier has any role in that. You may be dependent on suppliers, vendors to make the changes, right? So sometimes you may outsource your services to external companies. So those external companies should be aligned with your IT related changes, and your IT related changes should be aligned with the business changes. So according to the business, you make the changes, and according to your changes, your vendor who you have outsourced the service should manage the changes. And changes will be at three different levels: operational change, which you are seeing on the left side, bottom of the screen; tactical change; and strategic change. Operational change means the changes which happen at a day-to-day operations level. You may change the IP of a server, or you may upgrade a patch on the server. So these are all at an operational level. Tactical change is midterm. Midterm changes are tactical changes. Strategic changes are long-term changes which you do on a long run, right? Don't think that changes means only the technical changes. A change in a process, change in culture, anything can be a change along with the technical changes. So all these three should sync. Your vendor should sync according to your service operations, and your operational changes should happen according to the business operations. And tactical change, according to the business process, you will make the tactical change. And strategical change, business will do in order to manage their business, and accordingly, you will make changes at an IT service level. So, in a nutshell, what they are saying is your IT changes as an IT service provider should be aligned with the business, and accordingly, your vendor changes also should be aligned with. And now, value to business. What is the value of change management? It can contribute to the business. The business interest will be protected because you'll make sure that by introducing change management process, you will be making only the changes which are beneficial to the business. So according to the customer interest, according to the business interest, you'll make the changes, thereby the business will be benefited. And you will make the changes according to the customer needs, as I told you, while optimizing the cost. So you have to make sure that you're making the changes cost effectively. With minimum cost, you have to make the changes. And by having a proper change management process, you will contribute the governance, legal, contractual, and regulatory requirements. So whatever the changes you are going to make, they should be aligned with the contractual agreements. They should be aligned with the government regulations or the governance which has been established in the organization or the legal requirements. If you have a good change management process, it helps in reducing the failed changes. When you make a change, there should be some objective behind that. You make the change, if the objective is not met, then there is no point in making such a change. So a good change management process will help in reducing the failed changes. And a good change management process will help in reducing the number of unauthorized changes. What is an unauthorized change? Without taking proper approval, without evaluating, without passing it through change management process, if the changes are done, then they may prove to be disastrous. So you can reduce, because change management process will keep a close watch on what are the unauthorized changes without taking approval, what changes are being made. And change management process will help in delivering the changes according to the business time scales. So business will tell, customer will tell when the change has to be made, by what time the change has to be completed. So within that time, within the agreed time scales, the changes can be done. Thereby the changes can be minimized. The changes will help the business objectives. Change management process will help in tracking the changes throughout the life cycle. So throughout the life cycle of change, till the objective is met, you can track well, you can check whether the change has produced the benefit or not, and what impact it had on the assets of the customer. Because at the end of the day, the customer assets will be impacted because of the changes what you make. And a good change management process contributes quality change within the time and within the cost. So within the predicted time and cost and desired quality, the change management process will help in ensuring the changes are done accordingly. Change management also look into risks because of the change. Thereby, the risk management can be done. A good change management process will help in improving the productivity of staff because interruptions will be minimum. If unauthorized changes are done, if the changes are not evaluated, and if the changes are made according to the whims and fancies of the individual, it may lead to some disruption. If you have a proper change management process, what will happen? It will help in improving the productivity of staff because you don't have any interruptions. Everything will be a smooth water sailing. A good change management process will help in reducing the mean time to restore service, MTRS. I mean, you will have a change window, right? When you make a change, normally you'll have a change window. Within that time, you have to finish it off. So once the change is done, the service will be restored, and from there the users can use it. So a properly planned change, a properly monitored change, a proper controlled change will ensure that the average time taken for the change will be as minimum as possible. Thereby, the average time to restore service will be minimum. So if you have a proper change management process in your IT environment, it helps in liaising with business change process. As I told you, your changes should be aligned according with the business change process. So If there is no change management process at all, what will happen? There is no one to check whether your changes are being done according to the business changes, and people will do on their own according to their convenience. And what are the policies related to change management? You can have some policies. You have to create a culture of zero tolerance for unauthorized change. Zero tolerance means 100% you have to follow. Not even 1% deviation is allowed. So you can have a policy saying that no unauthorized changes without approval, you are not going to do any changes. You will take a policy which ensures that there is zero tolerance towards unauthorized changes. You will align the change management process with business, project, and stakeholder change management process, which I already discussed. Your change management process should be aligned with business change management, and they should be aligned with the projects which are already in pipeline. And you should align with the stakeholder change management process, your vendors, right? Anyone. And you can have a policy saying that changes should create business value. It is not that as an IT department you don't have any work and appraisal is approaching, so we have to make some changes, we have to prove some point. No, only if the change can create business value, it can create business benefits, only those changes should be allowed to be done. You have a strict policy saying that. And changes should be prioritized. You can have a policy. So in changes also we'll have high priority, medium, or low priority, which should be done, or emergency changes should be made. You have to prioritize. And for all the changes, it is always better to have a single point of contact. Otherwise, what will happen? There will be complete confusion and chaos. For example, there are two change management process, two cabs are there. One cab is for servers, one cab is for applications. For example, server, you are making some changes and the CAB gave approval on 25th of August. Application, CAB also gave approval to make some changes to application on 25th of August. How? Because this application is running on the same server. Then there will be complete confusion. If there is a single point of contact for all the changes, then you will have a proper track and such type of chaotic situations can be prevented. You can have a policy saying that there should be only one body which will approve the changes. Integration with other service management process. Change management process should integrate with other process. Incident management and change management should talk to each other. They should interface each other. Problem management and change management. Change management and service asset and configuration management. So you can have a policy saying that these processes should talk to each other. And you can have a policy that there should be performance measurement for change management process. All changes should be measured. How many changes have you done? How many changes are successful? How many changes are failures? How many changes are completed within the change window? How many changes are done within the time scales? How many changes you have done within the predicted budget? You should measure the performance of change management process. How many changes led to the business benefit? How many changes are failed? You can have various measurements which will tell the performance of the change management process. And there are some key concepts like what is a change? Any addition, modification, or removal of anything to an IT service is called a change. You are adding something, it's a change. You are modifying something, it's a change. You are removing something, it's a change. So that is the definition of a change: addition, modification, or removal. RFC, it stands for request for change. In general, in outside world, they call it as change request, CR. The ITL terminology for a CR, change request, is RFC. It's a formal request to make the change. You will furnish all the details. When are you going to make the change? What are the changes that are going to happen? Who are going to do the change? What is the reason for the change? Who is responsible for the change? What are the risks associated with the change? Do you have a backup plan associated with the change? You will put all this information and you will submit this RFC to the CAB, Change Advisory Board. Change proposal. We discussed it before. Change proposal is like RFC only. Only if it is a major change where you have significant cost, risk, or impact, then we call it as change proposal. Normally, these are initiated by service portfolio management of strategy. Service portfolio management is a process which will give a go no go decision whether a change has to be made or not, a new service has to be brought or not. So, normally, if service portfolio management is raising a change means the changes are usually big. Just to change the IP of a server, just to do a patch upgrade of a server, service portfolio management, they don't poke their nose. Only if the changes are significant, which involves high cost, risk, or impact. So such changes are called change proposal. So you distinguish a small change and a big change through an RFC and change proposal. Change record. In general, we call it as change ticket outside change ticket. So the tool, you will raise a change ticket which contains all the history of the change, when the RFC is raised, what are the various activities happened as part of this change, what is the status of this change. So in the ticket you will furnish all the information, that is nothing but change record. And there is something called CAB, Change Advisory Board. Group of people, they convene together and they form change advisory board. So the stakeholders who can evaluate the change, who can give some suggestions about the change, these stakeholders will convene together, and that is called CAB, Change Advisory Board. They will advise on the change whether you should go ahead with the change or not. Normally, CAB is chaired by change manager. So the head of the CAB will be change manager. The stakeholders may change. So if you are making SAP changes, you will have SAP related technical people also involved. If you are making Windows changes, Windows people will be part of this. The stakeholders may change who are part of the CAB, but there will be one permanent person who will be chairing the CAB, that is your change manager. ECAB, it's a subdivision of CAB, you can say. It's an emergency CAB. Normally, when you don't have sufficient time to advise on a change on a periodical basis, you take some emergency decisions, you give some emergency approvals, and that will be done by ECAB, Emergency Change Advisory Board. Even if it is an emergency change, you have to take the approval. You can't run away from the process saying that it's an emergency change. I didn't have time to take the approval, so I had to do that. No, the process of approval will be expedited. Maybe you may get the approval through fax or through an email first, right? But on the fly, you have to take the approvals and you have to do that. And this will be done by ECAB. And there are three types of changes: standard change, emergency change, and normal change. What is a standard change? Standard changes are pre-authorized changes. Normally, the changes which are of low risk, which are very common changes, you may consider them as standard changes. You take one time blanket approval for these changes and you try to implement these. So, such changes are called standard changes. For example, you want to install MS Office on the laptops of the users. What is a great risk in that? Installing a small piece of software. These type of changes, you take blanket approval. Even approvals are required even for this, but you will take one-time approval. So whenever I make some these changes, I will not come to you every time. Give me a blanket approval, like I need not come every time. These type of changes, yes, these are all pre-authorized, pre-approval. Emergency change, as I told you, in order to fix an emergency problem, you make the changes. It's called an emergency change. Normal change is whichever the change which is not a standard or emergency change is a normal change. Normally, normal changes are done on a periodical basis. Every second Sunday or every last Sunday, you have time to take prior approvals and you have time to take to evaluate, right? And you do it on a periodical basis. Such changes are called normal changes. And you have something called change model. A change model is predefined set of steps to handle a particular type of change. All SAP changes, this is the model you have to follow. All Windows changes, this is the model you have to follow. All strategic changes, this is the model you have to follow. Step by step, how are you going to do that? And what are the roles and responsibilities of different people? And you may decide the steps in a chronological order, and you may have an escalation procedure. So you have to define any changes related to this should go in this order. So that is called change model, the predefined set of steps to handle a particular type of change. So what are the activities you do as part of change management? You do change planning and control. Change planning and control is you will plan the changes when the changes has to be made, and you make sure that only authorized changes are happening. You will do a change scheduling and release scheduling when the changes will be done and when it will be released and ready to use. And communication, so you will release the communication saying that this is a change schedule that we are going to implement in the next 1 month or so, and you will communicate the impact of the changes, how many changes are successful, how many changes are failures. You may submit some reporting as part of the communications as well. So change decision making and authorization. So you will evaluate in various perspectives, and you do the decision making whether the change should be approved or rejected. You will authorize if it has to be done, and you will make sure that there are remediation plans. What is remediation planning? Remediation planning is you have to plan what if the change is unsuccessful. You may have a fallback plan or a backout plan. If the change is not successful, you will restore to the last known situation. You will go back to the old state, or sometimes if you can't go back to the old state, you may instigate the IT service continuity, the disaster recovery, right? You may have a redundancy in place. You make sure that some duplicate spare is available. Immediately you try to replace with the duplicate thing. So anyhow, whatever you do, end of the day, what is the remedy if your change is not successful? That is the remediation plan. And you have to measure the changes, you have to control the changes. When I say measure the changes, you have to measure the performance related to the cost of the change, timelines, success rate of the changes, everything you have to measure. You have to control them, and you have to do the reporting, management reporting, like how many changes were made, how many changes were done within the time scale, how many changes were completed within the budget, how many changes were deferred to a later time, how many changes were rejected, how many unauthorized changes made. So all these things you will report, which highlights the performance of change management. And you have to understand the impact of the change in terms of cost, in terms of time, in terms of business loss, in terms of business benefit. So you have to understand the impact, and the change management process, you have to make sure that you are continually improving. Continual improvement, as I told you before, it is not confined to a single process or a single stage. It is confined to all the stages, all the process, everything what you have in the IT service. So even the change management process should be continually improved in terms of timelines, in terms of cost, in terms of success, everything. The improvement should happen. So this diagram depicts the sequence of activities that happens, the workflow in change management. So you will create RFC, you will record the RFC, you will review the RFC. Reviewing is whether all the fields are completed or not. So in RFC, you have many fields like who is raising the change, what is the impact of the, what are the risks associated with change. So everything has been filled or not, all the information is given or not. And then you will assess and evaluate the change. You will evaluate whether this change is beneficial, what would be the impact of the change, whether the benefit is more or the negative impact is more. You do a balance of the both. So you will assess and evaluate the change, and Every time, whenever you are building, you have to authorize it. When the testing is done, it's authorized in transition environment. To start the build, you have to authorize. To test, change management approval is required. So they will check whether the testing environment is ready or not, whether the testing infrastructure and the readiness is existing or not, and then accordingly they will authorize it. And they will coordinate the build and test whether the changes are happening properly or not, and they authorize the change deployment. Even for deployment, you have to take change management approval. So if you want to deploy into operations or live, you have to take the change management approval, and you have to coordinate the change deployment, and you will review and close the change record. This is how it happens in an operation environment, because sorry, not in operation, transition environment. Because transition, I told, it's all about BTRD: build, test, release, and deployment. So at every stage, you have to go to change management approval, and you have to make sure that these changes are happening. So these are the things which we discussed now. Create and record the RFC, review the RFC, assess and evaluate the change, authorize the change, build and test, coordinate the change, build and test, authorize the change deployment, coordinate the change deployment, review and close change record. So the first activity, create and record the RFC. The change is raised by a CR, change request, or RFC will be raised from the initiator. It can be one individual or it can be an organization which is requiring the change. The change is logged in the tool. And if this change is because of some problem ticket, to fix some problem on a permanent basis, some issue on a permanent basis, as part of the permanent solution, then you will take the reference that this change is made related to this so and so problem issue. And then the review. So you will review whether whether it is completely filled or not, whether it is practical or totally impractical, or if the submission is incomplete, you review. Once you review them, then you do the evaluation. The evaluation will be done by the change authority. It can be change manager, or it can be people, group of people, right? So they will evaluate the impact. They do the impact assessment. They look into the risks. Because of the change, what could be the risks? They allocate the priorities. This change, what is the priority? Is it a high time that you have to make the change or not? During evaluation, you have to give answers for these following questions. This is popularly known as 7 hours of change evaluation. If you don't ask these questions, then you can say your evaluation is not complete. So before approving, as part of evaluation, you have to ask these changes. What are the questions? Who raised the change? First R. What is the reason for this change? What is the return expected out of this change? Benefit. What are the risks involved with this change? What resources are required to do this change? Who is responsible for this change? Who will build it? Who will test it? Who will implement this change? And what is the relationship between these changes and other changes? Relationship is also important. So you have to put these 7 R's, 7 questions, then you can say your evaluation is complete and comprehensive. Who raised? What is the reason? What is the return? What are the risks? What resources are required? Who is responsible? And what is the relationship between the change and other changes? So, who will be the change authority? Who will authorize the change? Different types of changes at different levels will be authorized by different people. For example, if it is a standard change, on the bottom right side you see local authorization will be there. Maybe your team lead can do if it is a small change, some authorized person. If it is a low risk change, change manager himself can do the change, authorize the change. If the change has some impact, a group of people or group of services will impact